Hello, social workers, mental health professionals, and change agents. Welcome to a special episode of the Social Work Rants Podcast. I'm your host, Bash Moreno. Saludos a todos. Greetings, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, tapping in wherever you are watching or listening to the podcast. You can follow the podcast on Instagram at the Social Work Rants Podcast. Follow the podcast on Twitter, especially while it's still free. at at Social Work Rants. Hit the like button on Facebook, aka Meta, at the Social Work Rants podcast. So we everywhere. We moved up from last year. Breaking news hit number 7 in top 40 of all social work podcasts. So thank you everybody for your level of support. Gracias a todos por su apoyo escuchando el podcast. And of course, hit that red subscribe button on YouTube, wherever you're tuning in, tapping in. And this disclaimer: this podcast is not to be used for therapies, for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you need to see a therapist or you're exhibiting some sort of medical emergency, please contact 911 or your therapist. If you're out of the country, whatever your emergency contact information is, use those type of services, and it's okay to be okay. Just get your help that you need. And for those of us who need CEUs, especially my folks in Delaware, because our license is about to be expired, need to be renewed in January. This coming weekend is an exciting conference, a 2-day conference virtually. And two of the ladies that's going to be a part of the conference and running the conference, and we're going to talk about it. Dr. LaShawn Paul, who's been on the podcast before, and also Tracysvon, I pronounced Ford, LCSW/R. Hello, ladies. How you doing?
Good evening.
Good,
I'm
good.
very well.
Yeah,
I'm
I got.
excited to be here. And I just want to formally thank you for having us on the podcast to talk about this important conference.
No, it's definitely important with everything that's been happening, continues to happen. And I feel like uh, ever since Elon, and I'm not blaming Elon, but ever since Elon got put on, as soon as I turn on Twitter, it's like some traumatic event going on within the Black and brown communities. And it's like, but I literally just woke up trying to shake the cobwebs, and I'm like scrolling on Twitter and see like somebody being killed, something like some racist stuff going to happen, something happening in a college somewhere, and now some you can't even go on vacation with friends because you friends want to
That's
set
so
you up.
scary, right?
So it's like
That's a
damn,
deep
Or
dive topic too.
on a lighter, scarier note, right? That even therapist Twitter is exploding, right?
yeah, absolutely. This is like between Twitter and TikTok, and it's like you can't escape like just nonsense. Like I'm just trying to find out if my Lakers won a game for once on Twitter without turning on the TV, and take off being shot and killed, and like what is going on, and it's like, but on a positive note, if you need CEUs, if you heard last week's episode, I had the interesting conversation with the executive director of the NASW Delaware and New Jersey, and Delaware has their conference this Friday. If you guys need CEUs, and we have the Redefine Strong Black Women's Mental Health Conference, Redefine Strong 2022, is happening this weekend virtually. So
Yeah.
wonderful speakers. I'm looking forward to it. I got my ticket yesterday. I
Oh,
was
awesome. Thank
so
you
Very
so
good.
much for supporting.
so
I
I
think that one of the reasons, right, is that this was so important to us just as Black women, but also Black women in social work, right?
yes.
And being at that intersection of kind of othered within the social work profession, it was so important. And it was interesting to hear, right, that people who aren't a part of social work or aren't professionals who said, like, thank you for having this, right? oftentimes Black women are ignored and not necessarily seen in the most positive light,
Right.
and have unique challenges in regards to their mental health. And I thought that it was important to train, right, the people who ultimately provide the services, right, to make sure that they themselves can increase their cultural humility and understanding of Black women and understand that they're not a monolith, right?
Right. Of course.
As we were talking before, you talking about like you're writing and contributing to Latinx and social work book, right? And how important it is for people to not understand just a particular population, but even the subsectors, right? From whether that's substance abuse to even taking care of yourself, right? I think that this conference we made a point to include like what are the code of ethics stuff that was just only recently added of like self-care in regards to
Right.
like compassion fatigue.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
so I'm gonna let you kind of ask your questions unless you just want me to talk a little, because I can talk a little, you know that.
No,
But I'm obviously LaShawn, right?
right.
And I'm actually the creator and founder of the Black Women's Mental Health Conference, and decided to partner with NYU in order to be able to get these 13 CEUs over the course of November 19th through 20th from 10 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Um, and as I said, right, it was important to increasing the knowledge and awareness, right, for a community that don't have enough providers who look like them, who want providers who understand their unique needs, right? And I think that what was very important in creating this conference was having people reflective of the community, teaching, right? Oftentimes we attend conferences and the speakers are people who studied, right, a particular topic or a particular population, and they don't look like us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even though the intention was not to have an all Black women lineup, it was important that they were centered and integral, right? Part of the planning in addition to the conversations, right? So Tracysvon Ford was one of the members on the planning committee, including like Dr. Shatasha Cole, and then a couple people who were either my interns from Social Work Diva. So they even had an opportunity like different parts of our careers, right? LMSWs, LCSWs, and LCSW-Rs, and even interns getting an opportunity to build out what they thought social work was missing, right? And then even making sure, because Tracysvon Ford, she is like our mindfulness expert for the entire weekend, right? She could tell you a little bit about more about what she plans to do, right? And all of the podcast she runs, right, in regards to mindfulness and just like her workshops and those sort of stuff. But we know that having like a Zoom webinar, people get tired, right? Get Zoom
Yes.
fatigue, right?
Yes.
And one of the things that were really important for us was to give some type of grounding, give some type of meditation so that we can take a breather and break as we enter into spaces and as we exit out of the day, to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves in the process, moving a little, stretching a little, right? And ensuring that we are able to learn and absorb to the best of our abilities, right? I am going to have to cheat if I have to tell you who's going to be all the people because it's so jam packed, right? With different, there's 2 panels, right? One each day. And then we have actually something kind of not used to being in the social work, right? Conference is a nurse practitioner, right?
Oh, that's
So a
great.
psych nurse practitioner is actually going to talk about like best practices, hesitations with medication, how to ultimately like approach individuals, particularly obviously Black women, right? On how to have those difficult cultural conversations, especially because there's a hesitancy, right? And shame and stigma that surrounds like Black women and mental health treatment that is non-traditional for us, but traditional in aspects of medication management and those sort of
Right.
stuff. And then I think that one of the other pieces that were important, besides like the compassion fatigue stuff that I mentioned the first day, but was for my panel was like the seat at the table, right? So the idea that even Black women in leadership, how do we necessarily support them? How do we nurture them? How do we grow them? And how do we ultimately take care of our own mental health in the process? The people on my panel are like some really good heavy hitters, like Dr. Maddox out of USC. She is very much involved in DEI, right, at USC. And just even as a consultant throughout social work, but even through executive leadership stuff. And then even Dr. LaShonda Nicholson, right, who will talk about her even personal story, right? Like how work and not necessarily being listened to within the field, right? Even being the director, not necessarily understanding that she's not upper executive management, and those sort of how those things are interplayed, and ultimately led to a stroke for her, right?
Wow.
And then I think that even as we kind of move into day 2, there's so much, right? In regards to, there's a lot more conversations about intersectionality, just not only as the dual marginalization of just being black and a woman, but even identity in regards to how does necessarily queer and those sort of things interplay, as Cassie Walker, LCSW, will speak on that day. And then ultimately, kind of throughout, as I said before, the interweaving of Tracysvon Ford, and then ultimately like the approach to trauma treatment, right? How to do that in a telehealth world, right? Oftentimes we hear, and a lot of people feel like we went back to regular world, but the truth of the matter is a lot of Black women who are professionals or working in certain environments, it's not necessarily a priority to either go to therapy, or sometimes really truly it's life. We don't really have the time.
Right.
And as a provider who's been providing therapy since 2012 online, I was so excited when I saw that proposal, and the rest of everyone else was too, because I didn't have the final say, right?
Right.
But the idea of like how to meet Black women online and still kind of build that relationship. And then one of Tasha Fletcher, right, in regards to like motherhood addressing Black maternal mental health, right?
Ooh.
The idea of like cultural responsiveness, right? So we can talk about like, and other people there were so many good proposals because we only had 6 spaces. We had to narrow things down. But in hopes that there is a next year, right? We hope that if any of your listeners who didn't hear about the conference, not only to join us this weekend, and they can also use the promo code Social Work Diva, SOCIALWORKDIVA, for 25% off of the conference price if they are interested in joining the conference. And you can find the conference link through, I can actually give you the link if you want to share on your socials.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then also through NYU's website, if you go to their through NYU Silver's website, you will be able to find the conference if you just search Black Women's Mental Health Conference. I think that one of the beautiful parts about this entire weekend that excites me is kind of, honestly, I was telling Tracysvon earlier today how drained I felt, right? But I think that I'm also feeling a lot of big emotions, right? And excitement is one of them, right? To see it come to actual fruition. It's been my labor of love, I could say that, right? And as a mom of 3 sons, oftentimes I don't get to be around a lot of women energy, right? So to be able to kind of give back to a community that ultimately helps, right, take care of me, right, as a private practice therapist, right, is vital and important. But even beyond just my private practice, beyond me, there's that. I think I'm going to let Tracysvon Ford talk a little bit about what she's going to be doing this weekend. If you have any questions.
Well, I do have questions, but I want to get
So you can ask your questions first if you'd like, because I can kind of, if you haven't, I'll just weave into answer.
So you unpack, said a lot, and I definitely want to use a social work to unpack all that. Now, how was planning, this whole conference? Like,
Should I answer that, Dr. Paul?
She was the honest truth, or you want me to give the PC version? Go ahead, Tracy.
A lot of late night calls, just summer, like, conversations, a lot of giggles, a lot of support, but it's just a lot of
curse words.
Huh?
A lot of curse words.
Well, yeah. Some choice words, but just more of just the passion, right? We're being intentional with having this conversation, being intentional with bringing Black women together to have these conversations. LaShawn and I had did something over the summer, a women's circle, to really talk about like releasing like the, the Black woman's, the strong stigma, right? And that a lot of times this really affects us as practitioners, right? And assuming that we can take on more trauma and more extra work and more duties because of that strong Black woman schema. So we're very intentional of who we were bringing to the table, what that would look like, but also infusing the mindfulness piece of it. One, LaShawn knows it's my passion, right? But also intentional when you're thinking of, when I was formally trained in mindfulness, it was very few of Black women. And a lot of times I was the only person in the space. When you see a lot of articles, when you see things online, it's usually not Black women. Now it has started to change, but it's still not really pushing where there's a space. And there are a lot of Black women who are mindfulness practitioners that do holistic work. So to be able to be part of the conference and really talk about something that I'm passionate about, but also using that as self-care, because there's a lot of things that are going to come up, right? So taking that opportunity, like when you're starting off doing something with mindfulness, whether it's a conference, whether it's a meeting, a lot of times we enter a space at 10 o'clock and where's our mind? At 11, or what we have to do at 4, or what we have to do later. So starting off with that mindfulness practice and creating that space right in your head, calming yourself, gives you a better opportunity to be fully present during the conference and really cultivate and hear what's being said. In the afternoon, I'm going to be doing some grounding exercises. And then in the evening, like to end, I'll be doing another mindfulness practice as well, just to kind of cultivate the day. So I'm really looking forward to it.
I think for me, right, there were so many things involved that I didn't expect, right? So as the person not only planning, but organizing, it was a lot more difficult, I feel, for me I wasn't prepared, right? I think next year maybe I'll be a little stronger. But I'm glad that I had the support, right, from Tracysvon and other people who listened to some vents, right? Frustrations when things didn't go right? So there were some hiccups, right? And things were kind of this year done in the last hour, right? And I think that one of the beautiful things, but it was still done well. And I think that it was also done in a way that I'm really, truly proud of what we created. I can't wait for Saturday. I can't wait for Sunday. And I'm not saying that because, I'm selling something, right? It's what I always wanted to see, and I've never seen it before, right? And even though it wasn't necessarily my capstone project when I was in my doctoral program, my capstone was really focused on how do I close the gaps in Black women's mental health, right? And really focused on like increasing help-seeking intentions of Black women. And I felt like, yeah, we can talk about what Black women can do, but what can we do within ourselves that makes it a little bit more comfortable for them to get there? So starting there, and then also making sure that there was a part that we take care of ourselves as clinicians and practitioners were very important, was extremely important to me, and why we tapped Tracysvon to have so much time throughout the day, right? That is us taking care of ourselves. And other conferences that NYU has put on, they put on music or something else to kind of lighten the day.
Right.
But I felt like oftentimes too, we're uncomfortable with meditation, right? The first time I learned meditation, I was 21 years old at Columbia University, sitting in a clinical social work class, the only Black girl in that class, right?
Yep.
And I laughed because it made me so uncomfortable. And everyone was looking like, what's wrong with this girl? And my teacher, Vicki Rizzo, Dr. Rizzo said that, that's good. That's what you're going to experience from your clients, right? And the idea that was even welcomed with grace of being uncomfortable and different, right? Even helped me when I met clients who also, for the first time, we're talking about meditation, that's a white people thing, right? Or that's a yoga. I don't have money for that, right? And I think that is kind of a process for both of us for not only us as a profession, this conference is to unlearn and learn, right? Because we learn so much that, yeah, there's no conversation for populations, right? Populations, unless it's maybe substance use disorder, but we don't talk about the intersections of substance use with Latinx, right? Yeah. We don't talk about it or familial or the children of maybe someone with substance use disorder, or we don't talk about necessarily how we talk about Black women, but we don't talk about Black moms and their mental health and how mindfulness can be beneficial to motherhood, right?
No,
And I think that as we planned the conference, it became very difficult for us to, difficulties was how do we narrow it down when we have so many good people doing the work? Like Tracysvon mentioned, the idea of like the strong Black woman schema always comes up, and no matter what part of Black women's mental health that you're talking about. Right. And I think that
just society as a whole, like just here all the time, and it's not just TV. We're talking about the politics and just any political person who
anything, right? Like you think of like Stacey Abrams. I talked about Stacey Abrams the other day. Like I don't know anyone more deserving of any honor, but like a society that doesn't necessarily, you got to kind of smile, figure out the next step, and move on, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes it doesn't work out, right? It's the joke or Nicki Minaj. People can clearly tell I'm a Barb, right? Even though every time you tell me you mention your Lil Kim, I love Lil Kim. That doesn't mean that I'm anti Lil Kim, right? That's kind of, I shouldn't have been listening at 9 years old, but like that's another story about my parents that we're not going to bash them right now. But like, it's the idea of how and who we accept and who we allow to speak up and who has to be silenced and humbled, right? And who's allowed to be in leadership and who's allowed to be in power and who's allowed to even have a voice or exist, right? Like, who are we allowed to protect? And oftentimes that person isn't a Black woman. Mm-hmm. And even, I'll be real, one of the things with this conference is, right, it's not designed for Black people or people of color to show up, right? Social work is 73% white.
Yeah.
My intention and my hope was it's not just going to be us showing up to listen to us, right? We've experienced us, yes, maybe not even professionally and personally, but majority of providers don't look like you or me providing services to people who look like us. So as I was creating this and as we were planning this, right, it was important, and we were intentional to keep the end user in mind. And the end user are really, truly white women, right, in our profession, and other people who are providing services, but are not necessarily providing the most culturally competent services, right, which is unethical, right? And failing to necessarily, and it's not to say you have to buy this conference in order to practice more ethically, right? Definitely not that at all, and not my intention. But having more conversations like this, having conversations, or even in spaces that's an academic space, right? With NYU, one of the most prestigious schools of social work in the entire country, was important because it means that people care enough to back and support Black women, elevate Black voices, and ensure that Black women are going to be taken care of. That's truly like how we work towards closing the gap. So I think that I've complained enough about the processes or when things aren't done properly, or COVID gotten people sick in the process. They're like, come on, very short on days. But I think that all of that doesn't matter at the end of the day, because if we have one person that's educated a little bit more, correct, and able to practice even more mindfully and thoughtfully, and in a way that they're not burnt out, right? Because burnout isn't something that just affects the Black providers. Burnout affects everybody in the field. And we all have symptoms of it, regardless of if we're conscious of it or not. I talk about like all week feeling my energy is just drained or my body kind of like hurting. And even then I'm like living for Saturday and Sunday to be over. And it's like, no, I can take a couple minutes to check in, right? If that's a couple of my curse words, the Tracy might just be listening like, yeah, I'm okay, sailor, right? But like, if it's those sort of things, right? Creating a team, creating friends, building community, and even being here tonight, like, helps me be grateful for the process of planning.
No, I love it, and we're at a point where we're like beyond burnt out. Like there needs to be. I don't know what the word is. There's definitely a lot of compassion fatigue. There's a lot of grief. There's a lot of loss, and it's not just family members. Is like I gained like 20, 30 pounds in like the pandemic, and like I like to get back how I look like before that, and it's like that's not happening anytime soon, or like just like for example, like my kids look like babies like before pandemic. Like my son's like his voice deepened, like he's like got like hair on his chin, and it's like a little man. So he lost all his baby weight, and like and I gained like all
Like, who are you? I just
exactly.
know, man.
So it's like just like little things that even like the beginning of 2020, like we lost arguably one of the best basketball players in the history of basketball in Kobe, and like right after that, like Puerto Rico had earthquakes. Like Puerto Rico got earthquake. What the heck is going on? And it's like things went to shit after that. So it's
collectively, right? But as you said, right, there's that hope, right? That as much as so much has changed, because I went from one child to 3 children by the end of this year, right? Like early this year, my son was born. When I was on your podcast last, I was like secretly hiding my pregnancy, telling you that I was pregnant, but no, she didn't even know, right?
So yeah, I was like what?
So I think
I was like, she's taking a lot of naps, but okay.
Yeah, well, I take naps regardless, right?
Yeah.
And I think that one of the biggest things for me, when you talk about so much has changed, is so much has changed and people don't even recognize the collective trauma that we're all experiencing.
Right.
So much has changed in our individual lives, but collectively we've been all experiencing so much, right? To the point that even when I saw like Wakanda Forever, I think I cried an extra tear just to release whatever I was feeling, right? And my own grief and my own stuff, right? And I think that one of those things that is ultimately important is how do you kind of push through it, right? To kind of piggyback on the book behind you, like,
yes.
How do you kind of find like this triumph through this pain? And I think that we as practitioners have a very interesting role, right? We have to balance our own stuff, right? Through therapy, through mindfulness, or whatever it may be.
Books,
and then you wrote your book, right? And then also we have to take on so much that most people don't hear, right? Some of the most horrific stories, or some of the losses, or things that it's like, hold on, what's going on in me? That do I need to check this kind of transference? This is transference. Am I self-disclosing? Always kind of figuring out how to operate ethically and in a way that meets their needs, in a way that takes into consideration not only them as a whole person, but even sometimes in culture. And I think that as we did this work and as we try to push through this, whatever this is, right? I guess we're going to call it burnout 2.0, like it's Elon Musk Twitter 2.0 or something. But like, as we move forward into this work, right? It's like, how do we innovate? How do we get creative with the tools that we have, right? Mindfulness isn't anything new, right? But how can we necessarily take this and put this in this conference, right? So that people who normally don't have a break or a time, or they're just not sitting there looking at a computer, because there's also times embedded for breaks to do nothing and stand up and you move around in your house. There's lunch. There's all of those things involved too, right? But how do I necessarily sit here and just kind of necessarily unpack whatever I may not even realize what's going on within me? And that's not special to any of us, right? And oftentimes we don't get that in conferences, right? It was also important when you talk about planning the conference. I wrote a tweet about it, right? It was important for us. Most conferences, people, and this is not to be shady at all. I know that conferences were going on as I was saying it, so it looked shady. It was
it's funny because I know exactly the where we was going. There'd be no such thing as sexually harassing at a conference.
Thank God we're virtual, right?
Yeah.
Also, the piece of it too, right? And that's not even like it's just like things like that are just. But when you talk about like the compound stress, like even that the fact that it's sickening, we're like making jest because we're joking is how as a people we get through despicable things, right? But it's the idea that things like that happen in our community and people don't even feel protected within our own profession.
Right.
So how do we necessarily protect and take care of those who provide, right? And one of those ways for me was making sure that everyone who participated in the conference got a stipend for their work, right? They spent time and energy, so they got paid like any other continuing education workshop would have gotten paid for the conference, to either sit on a panel or to sit or to do mindfulness or to do presentations. It was also important for us that you shouldn't have to pay to come give information, right? You should be able to come to a conference for free. And anyone who's ever spoke at a conference knows one of the things in social work is, oh, pay to come to the conference and then talk and tell me your information for free. Oh, we'll give you your 6 credits, right? But for the rest of the conference, pay for it, right?
Right.
And we thought that let's be real, as for the Black women and the people that we were going to have on panels and in discussions, one of the most important parts of it was making sure that they were taken care of, both financially and mentally, in order to be able to give to others and to educate others. And in all fairness, for when you're charging for a conference, to make sure that a stipend is given, however small, however it is, right? And I think that oftentimes those things are overlooked, right? We're often tapped into as a resource in social work that you do it because it's the good thing to do, while corporations and organizations, which a lot of these organizations are huge corporations, right? With hundreds of thousands of members, will make money from a weekend and not necessarily support anyone that is contributing. And I think that it's a good precedent to set, right? Not only for our conference, NYU has done it before, right? But for other social work conferences to take that into consideration, and especially with like wage gaps and those sort of stuff, right?
No, absolutely.
To ensure that people are necessarily seen and heard.
No, and for those, like even myself, I put in for a proposal for NASW NYC chapter for next year's conference. So it was like, it's important. Like if you want to put in and do that work of doing a proposal, like be great. You get a stipend for if you get chosen, and it leads to more ingenuity and more stuff. Like for myself, I take pride in this podcast of talking about stuff other people are not talking about, or get my own perspective if something happens like the ASWB, and give my own traumas of failing 5 times, and like I'm never want to give them another dime. So it's like I give that perspective, or just things that, like I said, nobody want to talk about, and that stuff that I wrote in Latinx and Social Work Volume 2 book that only a handful of people ever knew that about me. So a lot of people are gonna be shocked, gonna be like, "Oh shit, you went through that, and you still like were there for your kids and there for your clients." And it's like, and like I talked about in the book launch, who's really there for us, the workers that providing the work for the clients, where we got our own drama going on, and like, we surviving like hurricanes. We got Hurricane Sandy in New York, New Jersey, and like still had to like go to work or somehow try to get to work and provide service for the clients and stuff like that.
Or when Blueberry didn't pick up the snow.
Exactly.
In the snow. They go to the hospital and refuse to say, you know what, if you can't get here, just stay home.
Or de Blasio for his 1,000 years in office didn't do jack
that was
shit.
Fun time, right?
Besides the universal pre-K, he didn't do nothing.
I think that one of the biggest, no, he did something. He took some money from the city that was unaccounted for. That's what he did.
Oh, yes. Supposedly, allegedly.
The drive fiasco.
Yeah. Mental health money on top of that. A lot of it. COVID
really saved him, didn't it? Right? Where that conversation just dwindled and they just exited out to nothing. I think just one of the biggest pieces, and what I try to do, right? When you talk about who's there for us, it's so funny. We always try to say, in social work, we always say, well, I'm not this person's therapist, right? That's what supervision is. Supervision is this, and this is what therapy is, separate, right? I'm not I'm his coworker or her coworker. I'm not this person's therapist. They need to find a therapist, right? And I think just one of the hopes that I wish for like our profession is that people actually give each other a little bit more grace. Because like you said, we're all kind of going through it. We're all trying to figure out what's the best for not only ourselves and our families, because this is a profession at the end of the day. We're all trying to figure out what's best for the communities we serve, and especially the communities we are part of, right? And the subsectors, right? If that's having individuals who maybe experience some extreme hard times, right? There's people like are writing about next year wanting to talk about like Black motherhood, right? Mother-daughter dynamics and things like that, right? So it's people like, hey, we want to be involved. We want to create this. But the only way to create it is for a lot of people, I feel like, to push aside their egos, right? I think that a lot of people sometimes feel like, or feel rejected, right, in the process. And that was the hardest part about someone that people kind of know in the social work profession, was people are feeling like, oh, you denied my proposal. And I'm like, no, that's why I created a team. That's why I said NYU will contact you. That's why I said a lot of stuff, because it wasn't anything personal at all, or which friends, or who we didn't choose people by friendships. We literally, at one point, a lot of the people didn't even know the people, which was amazing, actually, because they don't have access to Twitter. They didn't know who I knew. I didn't even disclose it until later that I know the person, right? And I think that it was kind of beautiful to see, right, what was chosen, what was eliminated, what was kind of moved around. That was tricky, right? Because there were various proposals of like compassion fatigue. And when you're narrowing it down to one and there's 6 people talking about self-care, then what happens in that process, right? And that was kind of hard because your mom could kind of like tell you, right?
Yes, yeah, because I was supposed to present one. But
and that's a member of the planning committee, right?
Yeah, and I'm on the planning committee, but there were several topics. So there was a conversation of which one would be done, right? But it was a collective, right, conversation, because that's one of my also specialties, in addition to mindfulness, is compassion fatigue, right? And I do a lot of trainings with that. But it was collective part of the conversation. We wanted it to be, right, part of that. So
and that's one of the difficult parts, right? So a lot of times I'm like hearing or like whispers or feeling, right? And some of it could just be me too, right? But it's also, it was the hardest part is people that you love and people that you care for and people that you've worked with and worked well with to say, no, not this year. And one of the other things when you talk about like, how was it planning? And I think that Tracysvon can speak to that again, right? It's that I realized there's a gap, especially I've presented at Social Work in the City twice. Tracy and Yvonne and I were planning on doing a proposal to potentially present at Social Work in the City next year again. And this would be her first time actually presenting at a conference if chosen, right? And I was like, it's perfect because we were talking, like literally this stuff came out with self-care. I was like, Tracy, Yvonne, we just switch this and make it like something else, right? So we can like use her stuff as bare bones. And I think just as social workers, sometimes we kind of have to pivot.
Right.
And even though we want to be the voice of something, right? Someone's like, your face isn't first on the pager. And I'm like, it's not about egos. It's really about the people that we serve and how can we serve them more. And honestly, when you talk about like your life, how can we heal the little girl if her mother would have gotten therapy, right? How could we have made it that those people would have sought those sort of things? And I think that if we think of it in that type of capacity, right, as whole human beings in this profession and ourselves, is how can we push past some of the difficulties, right, that we're facing from systems, right, and we're facing from just general life,
right,
and bring something to people that is hopefully that you can say that it's good, right? I'm biased, so I think it's going to be great. But bring something to people so people can learn and we can continue to grow together just as a community. Some of my the people who shared most, the people who supported most don't look like me.
It be like that. I mean,
And that's a conversation that needs to be had at some point, right?
No,
It be like that, Baz. It be like
I know firsthand, because majority of people who bought my book I like never met before. Met them for the first time and told them my story, and they bought my book.
And when you have those type of when you have those sort of things, right? Sometimes you have to push past your feelings. Mm-hmm. Because I get it, right? Everyone, there's monetization. Everyone necessarily wants to be an influencer or be that one. But I think that the more that we come together, the more that we operate together in community, not in capitalism, right? Because honestly, it was so funny. The money that I was supposed to necessarily get from this was supposed to go to programming that was actually for community services, right? Such as sister circles, such as those sort of stuff. And I think that we just didn't advertise that, because I know people always go, how much percentage is this? How much percentage is that? And it gets like, oh, what is it? 5% that you're giving to whatever. And I think that it's so funny because we never question where the money's going when it's CSWE. We never question where the money's going when it's NESW. But to question a Black women's conference in that type of way is racist. And some of it is internalized racism. Right. And I think that as we kind of push past all of those barriers, even sometimes ourselves that hold us back from being better or great, the truth of the matter, at the end of the day, we have a conference that we can truly, truly be proud of. I don't think I worked so much hard in labor ever. I cannot even think. I have never worked as hard to bring a child into this world as hard as I've worked to bring this conference together. And my body feels it, right? I used to walk around after having babies with no issue, right? Even after my last baby, I had to have an emergency C-section. It didn't even feel this rough. But I think that it is an amazing thing to see how well that I'm supported by Ben Scher from NYU, the director of Global and Lifelong Learning. It's like, LaShawn, whatever you kind of want. I thought I had to give him a speech, right? I came to pitch and he was like, yes, right? Before I was like, Ben, I got to finish my pitch. Like, I went to school and had to pitch. And it's all of those things where it's like, when you talk about the support that I've received just from everyone, Ben, white, Jewish, cisgendered male, right? To you and to so many different people who don't necessarily look like me, and also obviously people from my community too. Right. But it's been an amazing experience in regards to love and care and holding up a community that oftentimes, and I'm grateful and there's gratitude, right, for those who supported. If it was a share alike, whether it was buying a ticket, it really truly helps us begin to rectify and close gaps even in our profession. No, and for that, I'm grateful.
When you first said about the conference, and then I was like, all right, cool. And then I was like, it was on the weekend too. I was like, all right, let me work my whole schedule around. It's like I'm only able to do Saturday, but I'm looking forward to it.
You can still watch it and replay. So I actually convinced.
That was actually one of my questions.
Because it's not written anywhere, right? I actually spoke to Ben at NYU, and if you watch the replay and fill out the paperwork, you will be able to get the rest of your CEUs. So they'll only get CEUs for the first day if you watch it live and fill out. He'll explain it during the first day, what is the expectation. But even if you're on the go, right? The conference is in Zoom webinar, and that was very deliberate, right? Mm-hmm. It was so that if you're on the go on the weekend and you're washing dishes in your house, you don't have to worry about putting yourself together. Like, I gotta force myself to not look like yesterday each day, right? But like, you can wash your dishes, cook your dinner, spend time with your family as you listen and learn, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to sit at the desk, at the computer and feel stuck, right? Because that's also ableist. Let's be real, right? Some people require more movement. Some people require laying down. So we deliberately didn't have people on the conference. However, the chat is open compared to other conferences that NYU has done, so that if you see something that you feel that you want to share or ask questions, that can still be interactive in that type of way. But it doesn't require you to sit on the screen all day for 2 days, right? And now we also have the option that even if you can't attend the full conference or even any part during this weekend, you can use it as CEUs that are not just like what's considered in person, face to face, like, right? But you can also use it for CEUs that are ultimately not necessarily self-guided, but in a sense self-guided. So I think that that's the beautiful part about it. It's also a conference, right? Which I didn't mention before, that it's eligible for CEUs in 55 states and territories, right? So wherever you are, that ASWB in every state except New York, ASWB CEUs you're eligible to use it to meet state regulations. Because New York always has to make sure we pay and find a different way, it is also approved by New York State Education Department in order to get CEUs in New York, right? So wherever you are in this country or within the territories and renewing your licenses, you can get those CEUs. But the real draw, right? Even though we all know we need the CEUs and we salivate at the CEUs, I hope the real draw is that you chose this conference too, so that you can build your skill set and your tool set with this and continue to come back next year. Hopefully we'll be hybrid next year. We were just trying to see what COVID was going to do to us, right?
Between COVID, monkeypox, MSV.
Yeah, let's be honest, that was just a new one. And we were like, we got to see people. But also, so many people have talked about other conferences and not having COVID protocols or things removed because the federal government does not change the protocols, right? So a lot of things are lax. And honestly, for a lot of people who are disabled, who are within our fields, we're like, I can't ever probably go to an in-person conference. So keeping that in mind, and as we plan for next year, right, is something that's important to us, right? Like, even if we do go in person, we're never going to always be in person, right? Because there are people who can't come in person. Even the finances to travel to New York to do something like that is a lot, right? For most people, especially as we approach the holidays, right? The fact that people are taking some of their Thanksgiving dinner money and spending with us is a lot, right? But it's also one of the reasons that I can't get over the word, like, when you talk about what I'm grateful for at Thanksgiving, I'm gonna probably you guys and for people who showed up, right, and decided to say this is worth us spending our dollars.
No, absolutely, absolutely, and I almost caused a quick personal story, real quick. I like to share personal stories on the podcast. So I almost caused a like, for a better word, a shit storm in my own house with my talented, amazing wife. But like I said, Thanksgiving is a regular day. I celebrate. I'm thankful every single day. I'm not using Thanksgiving one day to be thankful. And she brought out, but we're gonna see family, we're gonna eat and watch TV together. Again, that's a regular. You just proving my point. It's almost like Kanye. Like, you're proving my point in a way.
Like, don't be like Kanye.
No, I don't.
You don't claim to be. You don't want to claim like me like Kanye at this point.
No, I was like,
I told my husband, Kanye is dead. This is Ye. We don't know Ye. We used to love Kanye, right? George Bush hates black people. We don't know this Kanye. This Ye. This new DEFCON person, just absurd.
Yeah, no, he's definitely on my beyond canceled list. Like, especially like he still has yet to address the loss of his mother. Until he starts doing that, I don't want to hear from him. And his sneakers are trash. I can't stand the look of his sneakers. Like, he just ruined fashion for just period for me. I can't look at the sneakers. So So going back to Ms. Ford, tell me more about this mindfulness, because I know even like quite a few males who focus on conference, mindfulness, and shout out to Melanie Social Work. They've been talking a lot about mindfulness, and I know Josh from formerly Melanie Social Work. He's actually getting his doctorate in yoga studies, and he does a lot of mindfulness stuff. So, tell me what you're planning for this weekend.
So I'm going to open it up with doing like a compassionate U-turn. And it's kind of like a centering activity where you're also going to explore different types of self-soothing touches, right, for yourself while giving yourself some supportive words. And also just kind of cultivating what's your intention for the day, your intention for this conference, right? What you're wanting to get out of it. So it's kind of like setting the tone. And then I have like some grounding activities that we'll do, in the afternoon. One of the meditations that I'll be ending with, and I haven't decided if it's Saturday or Sunday, which is loving kindness, which is very common, but I'll add a bit of a twist to it. But I also, my intention also with doing this and us having this as part of the conference is to normalize, right, that mindfulness is a part of life, right? Something that you can have part of. Like a lot of times people think meditation is a form of mindfulness, but mindfulness as a whole is a way of life. And a lot of times people think I don't have the time to practice mindfulness, but it's not about taking any time of your day. It's something that you're incorporating, right, in your day. It's also normalizing it, right? That there are, again, as I say, there are Black women who are practitioners. There are Black men who are practitioners that are oftentimes that are not seen or heard, that are doing this type of work. So I'm very excited to offer that space, to offer some grounding in the body, to offer opportunities to give yourself just a space in your mind to feel comfortable, and that way you can really have more focused attention when we're doing the panels and stuff. So.
Yeah, sounds exciting. I'm looking forward to that. We definitely just need I always try to be as just focus on my own body. And I think at least for men, we always have this stigma of like going to the doctor and things of that nature. Something's off, and it's like I'll push it off. I gotta go to work. I gotta like take care of family, do this, do that. And I know when I had my appendix removed, and I felt like a little like something on my side, like going in and out. Like this is not normal. What the heck is going on? I let it go for a day or so. It was like, and it kept going, and it's like, did a whole like Zumba class and like back-to-back exercises, like classes, like for like an hour and a half, and like still felt the pain. It was like, luckily I worked with nurses on
and
my team at the time.
Rupture bad.
And luckily did not rupture. It, like luckily it did not rupture, but just like, okay, I need to get this checked out. This is not normal for me, so it's important that just the whole mindfulness and just everything just be intentional, whole like self-care, like and I talk about with my side business, Back City Entertainment. Self-care is not just a hashtag; it is a way of life, and having mindfulness just on a daily basis to be something real simple. That'll take like 30 seconds, and you just add to a minute, and just add that throughout your day, and sitting on the desk or you're out in the field seeing clients or whatever. It's just important to take that time for you.
Yeah, there's a connection between the mind and the body.
Absolutely.
And because of the collective trauma that we have experienced over these last couple of years, right, we're holding a lot of things in our body, right, because of things that our thoughts. There's something, and I often see a lot of times it's booked and busy. But there's a caveat to that, which can become problematic because you're not taking time to sit with yourself and just be comfortable. And when you're doing formal, training for mindfulness, a lot of it is just sitting with yourself, being comfortable sitting with yourself, sitting with your thoughts, not really reacting with your thoughts. So just learning how to incorporate that, still doing things, right? You want to be booked and flourish, but you don't want to be constantly on the go, because when you're always on the go, you know, you're not taking time and your mind is always racing, and you're really reacting to things and not responding. And mindfulness is really about not being so reactive and kind of just having like a different perspective and just not being so on the go. And also just not judging, right, yourself and giving yourself grace. A lot of times when we get upset or we have an emotion, we judge the emotion.
Mm.
And then we go right back into like those ruminating thoughts. And it's like that, like when you're thinking like CBT, like 101, right? One of the tenets of mindfulness is non-judging, right? And just accepting things for what they are, not pushing away, but just seeing things for what it is. So it's kind of part of the things that little nuggets that I'll be dropping throughout the day this weekend.
You mentioned earlier that you are a school social worker. Now, I definitely see the importance of mindfulness, with the kids and even teachers who and some teachers who, or I'll say veteran teachers who refuse to use social emotional learning and be like, the kids need to suck it up and do the work. And it's like, but hello, we just our second full year of post whatever version of this pandemic this is, and still we went from a year and a half of iPad learning and virtual learning now in school, and for myself, seeing little babies have a piece of paper in front of them and want to throw chairs and tables and throw in a fit because they got to do work on a piece of paper and writing and all this stuff. Like do you use some of that mindfulness in your work in the school?
Well, yeah, so my office is a Zen den. So I have waterfalls, I have mindfulness stuff. So I actually run a mindfulness-based stress reduction group because I have training in that for students. And then on Fridays, I offer meditation classes for teachers. So, and we're thinking about maybe, hopefully, just trying to branch it out to the entire school community. But yeah, I do that. And the students enjoy. Sometimes they'll come and we'll just do like a 3-minute breathing exercise where they're just putting their hands on their stomach, closing their eyes, and just using the anchor of focusing on how your hand feels as your stomach rises and falls. And just for the 3 minutes, what does it feel like? And, I have like water painting, all types of Zen stuff in my office. So I use that with my students as much as I can.
Cool. Dr. Pont, you was going to say something earlier.
I'm just listening. I actually there's a couple of things that came up when the two of you were talking, right? The idea that you use the word normalize, right? And her kind of talking about how normalized the grind culture is. And then also then when you came back, right, and mentioned how children are reacting, right? And you see usually with children things very externally, right? We see sometimes with adults, right? But we just say that's aggression, right? We don't say that's mental health, right? You see irritability with adults. We don't say that. We say that she's in a bad mood, right? And I think just like when you talk about not only with children, how things have become normalized instead of recognizing their social and emotional stuff, right? But also with men who sometimes kind of push through. I think that when you talk about like the strong Black woman schema, right, that is like the definition, right? The epitome of it is pushing through, right? Bearing and grin. It's kind of just making sure that everything else is taken care of. You're carrying the weight of the world, especially as the pillar of the community, right? You are trying to be perfect and overachieve to accomplish things past the barriers, right, of systemic racism. And I think that one of the biggest challenges is you don't realize that you are acting out too, sometimes internally. Sometimes we see it, right, in high blood pressures or obesity or weight loss or weight issues, right? And sometimes we don't see it ultimately when, as providers within ourselves, right? We're not, most of the time, we're saying, oh, this is just a little back pain. But the back pain happened because you sat at the desk 8 hours and like instead of day, right? Or or I didn't have lunch today. So I don't know how many friends who are in helping professions or social workers themselves that are like, have like gastric issues or ulcers. And I'm like, do you realize this? It doesn't have to be this way, right? And I think that one of the things too with the conference and for us is not only putting the mirror up and say, hey, help them. A big part of it is saying, help yourself, right? There's no message that any attendee, depending on how they look, whether they're a man, woman, they non-binary, regardless of whatever it is, that however anyone identifies by race or gender or sexuality, I feel like everyone can ultimately take home some nuggets, whether that's to practice and be more mindful in your thoughts and in your discipline, right? Or take home the idea that, you know what? I have to kind of be intentional with how I approach people. I have to do more culture. For a lot of us, school is a relic of the past, right? And especially our MSW programs at minimum, right? And I think that one of the things too, we attend these CEUs just to get them done. You hear people say like, "Oh, anybody know any free CEUs or cheap CEUs?" And it's like, so we often don't chase the quality, right? We chase the cheaper. And honestly, let's be real, there's a wage issue, right, in our profession. So that's not to knock people, and even myself. That's why I was like, okay, let's get this promo code or something to kind of like make it a little easier. But I think that there's a lot that goes on into this work. And if we don't necessarily take care of ourselves, we can't mirror, right? Or teach people how to do things if we're not truly living it. And I think that just like even taking the time to like breathe, right? To recognize how your hand is falling, right? To feel the warmth of your own body, right? Is important because we're so used to 50 tabs on a screen or clicking and doing things. When people talk about like the test, well, they're asking us which one do we do first. The problem is we do everything, right? And we're trying to be everything for everyone. And the truth of it is we often don't even have the time, right? Either conferences are during the week, right? It's also now you're during the weekend, so you're about to take away my weekend before Thanksgiving, right? What's happening? And it's one of the reasons why it was so important for us to kind of call people in, right? Not just call them out and say, hey, learn more, right? Call them in and say, hey, we need you to take care of yourself. And this compassion fatigue stuff, yes, it's focused and it's a Black woman presented and it's a Black woman doing this, right? But everyone can do this, right? No matter who you are. Right. It maybe makes you uncomfortable at first receiving it from this messenger. That's because you're not used to seeing us in these spaces in this type of way, right? You're also not used to seeing the Black women who are practitioners a lot, right? Oftentimes you'll see conferences full of people who are PhDs, right? Even as when you talk about like we planning it, when we're looking at certain stuff, we're like, okay, this isn't written in a way that's a conference way, and we got to send it to ASWB and it got to look a certain way, right? But it's also where I recognize that there's gaps for us within the profession as Black women based upon how things are written, right? Based upon how I know what they're trying to say, but it's not maybe being said, right? And I think that this is an opportunity for us to kind of look at ourselves, look at our profession, and figure out how do we kind of help each other and how do we fill gaps on education and on spaces to make sure that more of us, right, are presenting at these either national conferences or local and ESW conferences. Because those are ultimately like how people get hired in like higher ed and all these other different stuff. And if we don't know how to effectively write like a proposal, or if we don't know how to effectively take care of ourselves, we're going to be burnt out to even fill out the proposal or what we submit and do. And I think that it's important for us to kind of recognize the importance of mindfulness. It's one of the reasons I was so happy Tracysvon was able to join us tonight, right? It was because I think that at the end of the day, yes, it's about mental health, but it's about also mixing the traditional and non-traditional, right? And when I say traditional and non-traditional, I say that in a way that is in line with academic spaces that aren't receptive of us. And what's traditional, right, or considered non-traditional in our academic spaces is extremely traditional for our people, right, or in our communities, right, is having places to kind of talk, having places to just even us not to judge and saying we don't know and get it right is a problem in this field, right? You look like, oh, you don't know because you're this, or you're a racist, or you look at it and we kind of like point the finger at each other, right? And say, well, you need to do your work, right? And you need to go read. No, I'm not going to teach you. But if we kind of offer that grace again, right? I can't you say that word too many times enough, right? But I think that if we offer each other grace and give each other space to actually learn from each other and to grow, and take care of ourselves, right? Without asking and taking one person, right? We oftentimes, right? People have talked about it as the black tax, where one person is tapped in for, and I'm sure you get it, right? Because you're the podcast person. So everyone's probably like, I want to start a podcast. How can you help me and tell me what you need to do, right? And oftentimes it becomes a lot because like, how do I uplift my community? How do I be generative? How do I take care of my life, right? For you have children, but even taking care of yourself, right, is a big task to get up every day, to get dressed, to do this work, right? And I think that for us, it's just important to make sure that we not only support ourselves and in our own lives, but support each other truly.
No, absolutely. It's no, and I love the fact how you mentioned earlier that you're mixing in LMSW, LCSW, MSW, like just a whole different collection. Because even on the job front, it is like I've been searching for off and on since pandemic started of looking for a job, and it's like all the jobs are geared to you got LC, and it's like and when I talked to NYU students at the Latinx and Social Work Conference, and they're like, part of what I talk about on the podcast is like, why, like, okay, what about you guys? You're about to graduate with an MSW now, like you're forced to take a licensing exam, which is everybody knows is culturally biased, and now you got that's one step, and then like to take a LC, and it's like, okay, well, how about like people need jobs, like people need like.
I think also people have to be creative, right?
Exactly.
So you don't need a license in order to go get trained in mindfulness, right? And offer services or that are just those sort of things, right? You don't need a license to go into non-traditional spaces, such as politics, right? I love macro work. I honestly don't know how long this clinical streets are going to get me, right? Because I'm always kind of thinking of, okay, how do I solve this problem and the solution? And I'm tired of thinking about it on the small scale. I want to be a part of the people who make those decisions on how things are necessarily done, right? And I think that, and I'm able to do that as in consulting, but I'm not necessarily able to do that where the dollars are being spent, right? In municipal agencies and those sort of things. And I think that one of the important pieces, right? And even as you listen to like people who are either starting school or finishing out, it's to recognize that social work doesn't have this one path. It doesn't have to be through therapy. It doesn't have to be through any of those things, right? And it's also embracing the process. Like you're not going to be broke forever in this field. And there's people making, I'm not going to call people out, I'm not going to tell people's money, right? But there's 6-figure social workers, right? And I think that, yes, a lot of the times the pathway to that is the C, but there's so many different pathways to 6 figures way before a C. There's so many companies looking to hire people in EAP. There's so many companies looking to hire wellness people. And just even having a social work degree is something that they're looking for, right? I think that we are so used to our education training us to traditional pathways that, oh, go out, go work in an agency, get your LMSW, then get your C, and then also come and make sure you're director or supervisor for the agency. And these new social workers, and I can't even say the new social workers because it's also me, right? That new. But like, we're not going to, we want some type of autonomy. We want some type of independence. Or if you're necessarily working in a traditional place, your mind is on what's next. What else can I do, right? Our field doesn't have to be this one thing. I always consider myself to be a micro social worker on the intersections of macro work, right? Because I'm constantly figuring out like, okay, which politician can we do this event with? Who can we influence to go do this thing for NAMI? When you talk everyone, you are probably the 100th person for the week. If I'm being serious and not exaggerating, about a good 15th person, 16th person who said that they had an issue in regards to paying NASW. As an NASW delegate, right? That's disheartening to hear. I'm not NASW, so you can talk about NASW, right? But it's sad because this is who represents us, and some really good people don't know how to get involved and how to ultimately want to maintain their membership. And I think that sometimes too, we can yell at institutions from the outside, but the truth of the real change happens from the inside, and it has to be reflective of people who look like us. We have to run for roles and offices in order to make those changes. Not only when we run for those roles, show up for those meetings and do those sort of stuff in order to kind of not just be the voice screaming on Twitter or angry on Twitter, right? But the voice that actually puts the energy, even if it's the last little gust of energy, right? Not to the point that we're depleted, right? Be mindful with what energy you're giving and intentional, and ensure that we create a better profession than we inherited. And as all of us as people of color, right? We know we didn't inherit a perfect profession. After us, it won't be perfect, but it should be better, right? And I think that's my hope, that this conference will ultimately create a better social work than what we had, right, before its existence.
No, absolutely. And all the things that you guys are doing, and the way you guys are doing the conference, I hope it leads to future conferences, and not just NASW, because anybody could like come up with a conference, and that's another, I guess, revenue stream of income. You're using social work skills and create a conference. Like, if you got the time to do it, do it. But I'm saying, but I know millennial social work conferences are coming up in March, and like, and every NASW thereafter doing a conference. So hopefully you guys will be the breakthrough
premiere.
conference.
Don't make me blush. I got my fake blusher on. Don't make us blush, Baz. That'd be nice. I think that there's all room for all of us, right? Everyone needs CEUs at different times. Everyone is doing different amazing things, right? Some of those conferences are completely amazing. I've always wanted to attend. I just am very lazy traveler to like the Millennium Social Work conferences. I absolutely think that the more of us creating conferences, or the more of us creating voices, but in a way that is also giving people, because a lot of times what happens is a lot of those conferences that are coming up don't have CEUs attached to it. And I think that what's important, and what's very important for us, right, is, and I'm grateful for NYU for letting us, because it's not cheap, right? When people think that conferences, they're making money, right? It's not cheap to maintain those stuff with ASWB when your organization. It's not very cheap to pay for those stuff with New York State, right? To ensure that the CEUs are done, right? And you also have to have like skin in the game. You have to be doing those things for 3 years, right? And teaching educational stuff for 3 years, and showing proof that as an organization you've been doing that for 3 years before. But I think that I can't express enough gratitude to Ben, Cher, because one of the goals is not for it to always be through NYU. It's like, okay, baby bird, we'll train you, and then you go out, and then here I can give it on to Necessary Black Women and to Necessary Do It. I don't know, we'll probably be with NYU a lot longer because it's a lot more work than LaShawn ever thought. But like, it really is, it's designed for it to not always be in an institution that people are known. It's just a design so that we can receive the backing and the name, so that we can eventually, and also the reason why everything always has like co-sponsored and how it's necessarily done. I just wanted to create a conference. I didn't want to be a partner, right? I didn't want to necessarily be any of those sort of things. And I'm not an NYU grad, and they thought it was important for us to be able to have this and with them. And to NYU, I'm forever grateful. I'm jealous, right? I always used to say my cousins and a couple of people I know graduated from NYU, close friends, and I would always tell people to go to NYU and for that purple shirt, right? So hopefully I get like my purple shirt as a result, right? Even not
and the Yankee Stadium graduation.
Yeah.
No, shout out to NYU. I mean,
School of Silver, right? Of social work.
Yes,
School of social work.
Yes, absolutely. And really, so many great social workers doing work that's graduated from that university, and many I had the pleasure of meeting at the Latinx and Social Volume 2 book that's currently out on Amazon. That are contributing authors and really, really doing amazing work in the field. And so many current NYU students I got to meet and saw me cry in person in front of 200 people and on Facebook
awesome
Live.
That it was a turnout. I actually I said I was interested in that event. I couldn't make it. I was actually in meetings that night, but I'm happy that you guys had that amazing turnout.
Oh yeah, we had a great time, and just literally like I sound like Earn Your Leisure, literally like $1 million worth of ideas, and like
you sound like my husband. What is up with these men?
And just if you scan the room and just see like what everybody's doing, like literally it was just like partner with people, just be like having whole life changing things that could potentially happen and move forward. So it was definitely I didn't know what to expect. I was like, I took 2 PTO days from a brand new job I started. It's like I'm going, I don't know what to expect, and just it was a beautiful event, and definitely was emotional, and seeing my words in both in English and Spanish. Never seen my own published work in Spanish before, and it's just definitely an experience.
Awesome.
And I'm looking forward to the experience on Saturday. I'll try to catch it on my phone on Sunday. And where can people find you? Get tell me the code again for if people want to get save some money regarding the tickets.
So in order to save some money for tickets, you can use the code Social Work Diva. So SOCIALWORKDIVA for $25 off. And you can find me on Instagram at Social Work Diva and on Twitter at the SW Diva. So like I said, if anyone has questions or concerns or any issues that we can circumvent, or you just want to know more information about the conference for next year or get on our listserv, you can also email me at info@socialworkdiva.com.
We got to do some Zumba next year.
That would be awesome. Please, yes, let's have a conversation.
Yes.
Let's have a conversation. That's actually I've actually, when you talk about like taking care of yourself and the intentions, I've been in Zumba the past 3 weeks because I know I needed to get out there. So yes, let's have that conversation. And Tracysvon, please share your information.
Yes, please.
Yes. So you can follow me at on Instagram at T Ford Consulting. And that's the same on Twitter, T Ford Consulting. I also have a wellness podcast, the Positive Professional Podcast. And that's on YouTube and all streaming outlets. The Positive Professional. It's a podcast. And you can always just reach out to me there. I post on my podcast once a month. I do guided meditations. Every week there's a conversation about mental health and wellness. And at the end of the month, I always post a guided meditation. So you can always, everyone's welcome to feel free to check that out or email me at tfordconsulting@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies, for this amazing conversation.
Thank you for having us.
No, of
Yeah,
course.
I
Anytime.
can't thank you enough.
Greatly appreciative.
We have come through our New York swagger.